My sister ruined my childhood, but I turned it around and proved my worth. I'll never forget that day. My name is Leonardo. I'm 16 years old, and until that moment my life had been a constant cycle of fear, anger, and guilt. I woke up early, as always, feeling a strange weight on my chest. My sister Marina had already started with the cutting tone I knew so well, and I tried to ignore it, as I had for years. But something about that day felt different. The air in the house was thick, heavy, and the silence of the walls seemed to scream things no one wanted to hear. I felt small, crushed by a mixture of helplessness and exhaustion that I'd carried for as long as I could remember. Every step I took was measured, trying to prevent anything bad from happening, because I knew that if Marina wanted to, she could explode at any moment. The strangest thing was that, despite everything, there was a small spark of something I still didn't quite understand. Maybe hope, maybe repressed rage. I tried to focus on basketball practice, on the sound of the ball bouncing on the court near my house, but even then, I couldn't tune it out. I knew that day would change everything, and even without realizing it, I was about to face the worst part of my entire life with Marina, and perhaps for the first time, the best too. It was strange to feel fear, and something akin to courage at the same time, but it was real. I took a deep breath and tried to prepare myself for what was to come, unaware that nothing would be the same after that morning. In the kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee hit me before I even heard the fight start. Marina was furious about some silly thing I couldn't even remember, and I felt my body tremble, a mix of anxiety and alertness. My mother, Vanessa, was busy, distracted, and my father, Gustavo, pretended not to hear, as if forever detached from reality. I realized in that instant that I was alone in a way, alone with my fear, my pain, and my resistance. But something inside me began to ignite, a simple thought: I won't let this destroy me anymore. For years I had accepted her psychological and physical abuse as inevitable, but in that moment something shifted. I wasn't sure how, but I felt the need to protect myself, the need for someone to finally see the truth. And then came Marina's loudest scream, followed by the metallic crash of the flat iron falling. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran, and when I arrived, I saw blood. It wasn't just fear now. It was panic, desperation, and a rage I'd never felt before. Everything was exposed at once: the abuse, the manipulation, the lies. I realized I could no longer hide behind silence or fear. Time seemed to slow down. Every step I took toward her seemed to echo, and I felt every beat of my heart like a drum, announcing an end and a beginning at the same time. I was confused, and I felt a mixture of absurd guilt, thinking that maybe, somehow, I had caused this, even though I knew I hadn't. My mind tried to piece it all together. The years of yelling, slapping, manipulation, and now the stark reality was there, in front of me, evident to anyone who looked. I felt a mad urge to scream, to cry, to run, but also to fight, to rise up and prove to myself that I could survive this, that I was stronger than she imagined, stronger than any fear she had instilled in me. For a moment, I felt too vulnerable, but at the same time, more alive than ever. Every emotion was too intense to swallow, and I knew that this morning would change everything. It wasn't just about Marina, it was about me, about my life, and how I would finally take control of it. When the police arrived, with Detective Catherine in the lead, I felt something I had never felt before: recognition. Finally, someone saw what I was feeling, what I had endured in silence. I didn't need to tell them everything right then. My gaze spoke volumes. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. I realized I was no longer alone, that there were people prepared to listen, to act, to protect. It was the beginning of a change, still frightening, but necessary. I felt fear of judgment, fear of what my family would think, fear of Marina, but I also felt a strength that grew with each passing second. The world I had known until then was crumbling, And paradoxically, that was what gave me hope. Now, nothing could be hidden, and I could finally begin to rebuild myself. As Catherine collected the evidence, I stood, still, breathing deeply, my entire body aching and vibrating at the same time. I felt sadness, anger, shame, and, for some strange reason, relief. Relief that I was finally not alone, that someone was finally seeing the truth. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that the therapies, the court supervision, and the long conversations with social workers like Nicholas and Kathy would be painful. But I felt a spark of hope. For the first time, I felt like I could survive and even grow from it all. I didn't know it yet, but that day marked the beginning of my transformation. The day pain became fuel for my strength. For the first time, I felt capable of fighting for myself. After Detective Catherine finished talking to my mom and dad, I finally managed to get away from the chaos of the kitchen. I sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall, and felt my legs weaken. It was as if my body finally realized everything that was happening. My shoulders were heavy, my chest ached, and I felt a deep exhaustion, which came not only from the tension of the moment, but from years and years of pressure and fear. I remembered every slap, every insult, every cold look from Marina, and I felt like crying, but also like screaming. I wasn't sure which emotion came first. It was anger mixed with fear, mixed with relief and shame. But what stood out most was a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, something was visible, and I no longer had to carry everything alone. I realized that a turning point was possible, that the pain I felt could become strength if I let it. As I tried to gather my thoughts, my father finally approached. He looked lost, uncomfortable, but there was something different in his eyes. Before, he'd only wanted to maintain the appearance of the perfect family, but in that moment, he was beginning to truly see. I felt anger and relief at the same time. Anger that he hadn't noticed sooner, relief that maybe he could finally start protecting me. My mother was crying, silently, and as difficult as it was to deal with her discomfort, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, there was room for something to change. Catherine spoke calmly, explaining every step of what was going to happen, every procedure, every measure to protect Marina and me. I felt heard, respected, and it gave me a sense of power I'd never experienced before. Small, but real. I realized that for the first time, I didn't have to pretend everything was okay. I could feel fear and strength at the same time, and it was liberating. Later, when I was taken to speak with Nicholas, the social worker, I felt a lump in my throat. I had never spoken so openly about what I was going through with Marina. The words came out shakily, a mixture of fear and relief, but at the same time I felt something loosen inside me. Every detail, every blow, every insult I had bottled up for years began to come out, and with it, I felt a strange relief, mixed with shame. But Nicholas was patient, didn't judge me, didn't rush anything. I realized it was possible for someone to truly listen and understand me without trying to place blame. For the first time, I felt my voice carried weight, that my experience mattered. Even with the fear of what Marina would do or say, I felt like I was building something within myself, a firm ground, however small, to stand on. I no longer had to accept everything in silence. The feeling of helplessness that had plagued me for so long began to dissipate. As Kathy, the family-focused social worker, talked with my parents about their mistakes and the importance of protecting us equally, I realized the world was finally changing. I no longer felt that crushing loneliness, even though the pain was still there. There was room for understanding, for rebuilding, for each of us to find a new path. The anger over years of neglect was still there, but the clarity that something could be different began to grow. I felt my resilience transforming into action. I no longer needed to just survive. I could start thinking about living, and that somehow gave me the strength to face Marina, to deal with the situation without breaking completely. When I returned home that afternoon, I felt a different silence. It wasn't the heavy silence of fear, but a silence charged with expectation, with change. My sister was isolated, still dealing with her own consequences, and I realized I no longer needed to bow before her. For the first time, I could look at my own life and decide how I wanted to present myself in the world without being crushed by it. I felt hope for the first time in a long time, a sense that even with fear, anger, and pain, I had the capacity to rebuild something better. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but something inside me told me it was possible. For the first time, I felt like I owned my story. That night, after all the chaos, I lay alone in my room, trying to gather my thoughts. Every beat of my heart seemed to echo within the silence. I sat up in bed and stared at my hands, wondering how long I had spent feeling helpless, unable to defend myself, with no one to believe in me. I felt a mixture of exhaustion, anger, and at the same time a strange kind of determination. For the first time, I realized that my strength didn't come just from enduring the abuse, but from how I dealt with it internally. Every basketball practice, every run, every hour I spent trying not to cry silently now made sense. It had all prepared me to not break in that moment. I felt clarity. I could survive, and not just survive. I could grow stronger. It was strange to feel pain and hope together, but it was in this mix that I found a thread of courage I hadn't even known existed. I knew that night marked a dividing line. Before, I was just a kid trying to cope. After, I could start fighting for myself. As I reflected, my phone rang. It was a message from Tyler, a friend who only knew part of what I was going through. He asked if I was okay, and I realized that for the first time, I could respond to someone without feeling weak or ashamed. I typed a few shaky words and felt a quiet relief, as if a part of the weight had been lifted. I no longer needed to hide my wounds. I no longer needed to pretend to everyone that everything was fine. The pain was still there, yes, and the shame still gripped me at times. But I felt I could deal with it differently. I could acknowledge my suffering without letting it dominate me. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, control over myself, over my own story. For the first time, I could see a path, still tortuous, but mine. The next morning, I woke up with my body aching, but my mind clearer. I remembered Catherine's steady, attentive gaze, the way Nicholas had listened to me without rushing, and the way Kathy had talked about rebuilding her family. I realized there were people willing to protect me, and that shifted something inside me. The feeling of helplessness that had plagued me for years began to dissolve. I still felt fear, still anger toward Marina, but something had shifted. I no longer had to be a silent victim. For the first time, I could imagine a life where my choices mattered, where my needs were respected. It was a mixture of hope and determination, hard to describe but very real. For the first time, I felt like I could be my own boss. The next day, during Kathy's supervision visit, I began to realize that my relationship with my family could change. It wasn't about forgetting or pretending nothing happened, but about rebuilding something healthier. I could see my father trying to understand, my mother trying to truly listen, and even Marina, in her own pain, showing signs of awareness. I still felt fear of her, but not in the same paralyzing way as before. There were clear boundaries now, rules, supervision, and a sense that the abuse would no longer dominate my life. For the first time, I could breathe without the constant anxiety of being attacked or humiliated. This didn't erase the past, but it gave me the strength to move forward. I realized that my resistance wasn't just about surviving, but about learning to live consciously and protected. Over the next week, I began to notice small changes in myself. I felt more confident, more able to talk about my feelings, more prepared to deal with frustrations and conflicts. Every conversation with social workers, every therapy session, every basketball practice began to become tools for my own reconstruction. I was no longer alone, even with the full weight of the trauma. I felt strength growing within me, mixed with the pain that was still there, as a memory, as a warning. For the first time, I could sense that overcoming is not about forgetting, but about using each experience, no matter how painful, to strengthen yourself. It was strange, but comforting. I realized that despite the fear, anger, and pain, there was something inside me that could not be broken, my own will to live and grow. In the days that followed, every moment felt heavy and light at the same time. I still felt fear when I heard Marina speak, even though she was under supervision, but I began to realize that fear no longer needed to control me. I could choose my reaction, take a deep breath, step back, or stand firm without feeling smaller. Each session with Nicholas and Kathy helped me see my own strength, not just my vulnerability. I began to notice simple yet powerful details. My body responding to basketball practice, my heart racing as I ran, my mind processing emotions without panicking. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of myself. There was still pain, there were still memories that made me tremble, but I began to understand that it wasn't weakness to feel this way. It was human, it was real, and by accepting this reality, I felt I could truly begin to rebuild myself. Each small step seemed insignificant, but it was taking me away from the fear that had haunted me since childhood. One afternoon after school, I felt the urge to talk to Tyler and Ashley about everything that was happening. Not to pity them, but to truly share. I felt embarrassed and hesitant at first, but as I began to speak, I realized my words carried weight, that my story mattered, and that gave me confidence. For the first time, I could look at someone and feel worthy of being heard. I realized my voice was my most powerful tool, one I could use to protect myself and connect. Even though I knew Marina was still there, with her own pain and need for change, I felt I had space to exist, to assert myself without fear, and that was liberating. I could feel myself beginning to rebuild my own identity, separate from the fear she imposed upon me. During one of my therapy sessions, I realized how much guilt and shame I carried, even when it wasn't my fault. Catherine helped me see this, to separate responsibility from the pain that wasn't mine. I felt tears burning my face, but along with them came a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I began to understand that overcoming wasn't about erasing the past, but accepting that it happened and using it to grow. I could feel my mind clearing, my body lighter, my heart beginning to open to possibilities that had previously seemed impossible. It was frightening, but also empowering. I was beginning to believe that there could be a life beyond fear, pain, and anger, and that gave me hope. For the first time, I felt that recovery was possible, even if it was still in its infancy. On weekends, I began to notice small changes in my relationship with my parents. Gustavo tried to listen more, to pay attention, and Vanessa finally recognized that she couldn't ignore what was happening between her children. I still felt frustrated by everything they hadn't done before, but I realized that their change was also an opportunity for my own reconstruction. I began to allow myself to feel affection without fear of manipulation. Small conversations began to become sincere, and I realized that trust could be rebuilt, even if slowly and carefully. I was learning that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, but about making room for each person to have their own chance to change. For the first time, I felt like I didn't have to carry everything alone, that my family could, in some way, be a support instead of a source of pain. In my room, alone at night, reflecting on everything, I realized something inside me had changed. It wasn't just relief at being heard or protected by the authorities. It was something deeper. I felt my own strength, my ability to resist and rise up. I knew there were still challenges, that Marina would need to deal with her own consequences, and that I would still have moments of anger and fear. But for the first time, I felt clear about who I was and what I could be. I could face the world. I could assert myself. I could exist without feeling inferior. It was strange to feel pain and hope at the same time, but I realized this was my reality. Human, imperfect, but capable of overcoming. For the first time, I felt like I was beginning to regain my life. As the weeks passed, I began to notice changes that at first seemed too small to matter, but which, when added together, transformed my life. I woke up without that constant knot of fear in my chest. I breathed without suffocating anxiety, and I could focus on what truly mattered: my own well-being. Basketball, which had always been my outlet, also became a symbol of resilience. Every dribble, every shot, every practice seemed to remind me that I was capable, that my body and mind could reconnect in a healthy way. I still felt pain when I thought about the past. There were still scars, but they no longer defined me. I began to understand that overcoming doesn't mean erasing the pain, but living with it in a way that doesn't paralyze me. For the first time, I felt I could exist fully without having to hide or pretend everything was okay. The relationship with Marina was still tense, but different. There were clear boundaries, supervision, and an understanding that our actions had consequences. She was also in the process of recovery, dealing with her own frustrations and mistakes. I felt angry, of course, but anger no longer paralyzed me. I could acknowledge my emotions, face them, and move forward. It was liberating to realize that I no longer had to carry guilt or silent fear. For the first time, I felt that my voice and my choices mattered, that I could set my own limits without feeling small. This feeling of autonomy was new, scary, but incredibly powerful. I was learning that my life could be guided by me, not by fear imposed by someone else. My parents also began to change. Gustavo tried to listen, get involved, learn to protect and support, and Vanessa finally recognized that she could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening at home. There were still tensions and mistakes made, but something within the family began to rebuild. I felt hopeful seeing my parents try, even if clumsily. For the first time, I realized that a healthier relationship was possible, based on protection, respect, and communication. And in a way, this gave me the strength to continue believing in myself, in what I could achieve, and in how I could shape my own life from now on. The most impressive thing was realizing how my own perception of strength changed. Before, I thought being strong meant enduring everything in silence, accepting whatever came without question. Now, I understood that being strong meant speaking out, taking action, seeking help, and not allowing fear to dominate my life. Every therapy session, every conversation with social workers, every training session, and every step I took toward autonomy was a reminder that I could rebuild myself. I was still afraid. I still felt pain, but there was clarity. I knew who I was, what I could endure, and most importantly, that I had the right to exist fully, with strength and dignity. It was a sense of power over my own life that I had never experienced before. Today, looking back, I see that day as a turning point. The chaos, fear, and pain I felt were not in vain. They showed me my own strength, my ability to endure, and my ability to rebuild myself. I still deal with parts of the pain, of course, but now with awareness, resilience, and hope. I learned that overcoming isn't about forgetting, but about transforming each painful experience into learning and strength. My name is Leonardo, and I survived. More than that, I began to truly live. And that, in a way, is the most important victory anyone can achieve.